Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. Can you guys hear me okay? Somebody wants to put yes in the chat. That would be fabulous. Yes, perfect. Okay. Well, today we're going to learn a little bit more about personality and ourselves, and we have an activity that we'll do today to get you some points. So let's get started. So we can define personality in a lot of different ways. So it is comprised of our typical thoughts, our emotional responses, and behaviors that are relatively stable about across time and circumstances. So for you as a college student, it is typically going to consist of many different things. First off, your gender. Um, do you associate with being a male or do you associate with being a female? Age is also going to be a factor. The way you act as a college student is going to be very different than the way you act as a young professional adult, or possibly the way that you acted back in high school. What about your interpersonal style? Are you shy? Are you friendly? Are you outgoing? What type of people do you like hanging out with? What about your personal characteristics? Are you a moody pessimist or are you optimistic? And what type of body image do you have? What type of self esteem do you have? Do you have a high self esteem, a low self esteem? That is also very impactful when we're making new relationships. If we tend to have a low self esteem, we'll be more afraid of being rejected and less likely to reach out and make connections with other people. So, all of us have a self schema, and our self schema consists of interrelated knowledge about ourselves. Here, the concepts that are most strongly related to one specific person's sense of self. So, as a female, my sense of self is I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, um, I can have wife and mother over here, and then I could talk about other things that make me me. So for me, I'm not tall, I'd fall under short. I'm ambitious, I would be a professor, I like movies, I'm a brunette, and I'm outgoing. So really, it's just the way that you view yourself and how it's connected with one another. So think about what defines you as a person. Most of you, if you're male or female, you're going to be a son, a daughter, you might be a boyfriend, a girlfriend, and you have other sense of selves that help define you. And our sense of self and our self concept is really going to vary depending on our situation and where we're at. So, in this example, for a male that works in an office with a bunch of females, the way he's going to define himself is being the way he's going to define himself is being a male because everyone else around him is female. That being said, if we were to look at him working in a setting where he works with all white individuals, he probably is going to define himself as being black because that is the difference between him and the other individuals. So it's really going to vary from situation to situation and who is around us in terms of how we're going to identify ourselves. I already touched on self esteem a little bit. So, our self esteem is how we feel about our sense of selves. So, we can either have a high self esteem, a low self esteem, or a self esteem that's somewhere right in the middle. Are we pretty confident with ourselves, or are there a lot of flaws or perceived flaws that we're embarrassed about? We as individuals, as human beings, we all have what we call is a self esteem sociometer. And it's an internal monitor of social acceptance or social rejection. If we are in a situation where we perceive that we're probably going to be rejected from the group or from those around us, we're probably going to have a lower sense of self esteem. That being said, if we are in an environment where we feel that our probability of rejection is going to be low, we are more likely to have a high self esteem. So think about one thing that often comes to mind is maybe a transfer student in high school. As a transfer student, two things could either happen. Either you'll feel like you're going to be rejected because everybody already has their in groups, and therefore your self esteem might be a little lower. Or let's say in previous experiences, that person has integrated nicely, they've been able to make friends on the first day. They are probably going to have a higher self esteem based on their previous experiences of changing schools. So, how does self esteem affect our life outcome? Well, a review of several hundred studies found that although people with high self esteem report being much happier than others, self esteem is weakly related to objective life outcomes. So, those with high self esteem might be happier than others. But when we're looking at overall objective life outcomes, there's just a weak correlation. So, if you know that you have a low self esteem, that doesn't mean that you cannot live a fulfilled, happy life. It's just that those with a higher self esteem are typically going to be a tad bit happier. And apparently, when we're looking at the research, they were doing research in the future. I'm guessing that's supposed to say 2003, not 2033. An interesting concept is also those people that's a narcissist. And having narcissism is actually a type of personality disorder, depending on how extreme it is. So you can have personality traits that link you to being a narcissist, but we also have a personality disorder as well. So people's self-esteem varies over their lives. Low points in self-esteem are typically going to be seen in the late teens and early 20s, especially for females. So between that ages of probably 16 to 23 for females are going to be their lowest points of self-esteem. It's also experienced towards the end of life when people are no longer independent and they need help doing their everyday tasks. Self-esteem typically peaks when people are in their 60s. So right about here, 60 to 69, about that age where people are retiring. They get to enjoy all of the hard work they put in over the past 60 plus years. And then we see that decline around 80 to 90, and that is because so many individuals at that age typically might end up in a nursing home. They might need to have somebody come into their home to help them with the everyday tasks, and they just tend to lose a lot of that independence um, and being able to do things by themselves, which is very difficult and can lead to a low self-esteem. So there's different ways that we can compare ourselves to one another's. So when we refer to downward comparison, this is comparing oneself with another person who is seen as less competent or in a worse situation, which tends to protect a person's high self-esteem. So this is so downward comparison is taking somebody that's in a worse state than you are, comparing yourself to them and making yourself feel good because they are in a crappier situation than you. Upward comparison, on the other hand, is comparing oneself with another person who is seen as more competent or in a better situation, which tends to confirm a person's lower self-esteem. So downward comparison is looking down upon somebody, thinking they have it worse. Upward comparison is looking up at somebody who's in a better state than we are and feeling crappier about ourselves. And typically, as human beings and individuals, we have what's called temporal comparison. And this is in which people view their current selves as better than their former selves. I was actually just thinking about this the other night in terms of when I look at my high school years, my college years, um, we've all done things that we're probably not proud of. And I see myself in my current state as being a much better individual all around versus how I was as a high schooler and in college. And that is an example of temporal comparison. But when I was in high school and college, I didn't think I was a bad person or ashamed of things I did. Um, but as I mature and get older, I tend to fall into that group. And we can see that here. So people tend to make temporal comparisons that indicate more positive perceptions of themselves now than in the past. And really, this is a form of downward comparison, and it has the effect of protecting a person's positive sense of self. So if you were to look back at your previous self, you feel good. Your ego's inflated that you have grown and matured into the person you are now. So as college students, think about yourself as a high schooler. What do you think? Do you think that you're a better person now, or do you feel that you were a better person in high school? So typically, if we look at this chart here, we are going to see ourselves as having more negative aspects in the past and more positive aspects now here in the right now and in the future. We've talked about the self-serving bias a little bit earlier. And this is that tendency for people to take personal credit for success, but blame failure on external factors. So when something good happens to us, we take personal credit for it. So an example that we have here is students who do extremely well on exams. You might think that you did well because you worked hard, you studied hard, you are contributing it to internal factors. But let's say you did poorly on the exam. You would blame it on external factors. You could say the teacher didn't teach us well enough. I didn't get enough sleep last night, and therefore I wasn't able to study and retain the information like I should. And we often see differences in self-esteem when it comes to influences from different cultures. So we typically have collectivist cultures, and these groups, give me just 1 second. Okay, so sorry, my 3-year-old's running around with my phone and dialing phone numbers. So we can look at two different cultures. We have collectivist cultures, and these emphasize those group connections, those family connections. They really stick with social groups, ethnic norms, and they conform to societal norms. Some of the cultures that we often think of when we're talking about collectivist cultures are going to be those from Japan, China, some regions of Africa. And people in collectivist cultures tend to value following group norms and obedience to authority figures. Where, when we look at individualistic cultures, these cultures emphasize the rights, freedom, self-expression, and diversity. So the United States is most definitely an individualistic culture. People in individualistic cultures tend to emphasize individuality, freedom, and forms of expression. And the sense of self is going to differ across cultures, and some aspects are more important to the self than others. In collectivist cultures, the most important elements of a person's sense of self tend to reside in areas where the person's sense of self is connected with others. So being a part of that family group, being a part of a religion, of a political stance is all going to be very important for collectivist cultures. In individualistic cultures, the most important elements of a person's sense of self tend to reside within that person. So when we're talking about individualistic cultures, we tend to focus on ourselves and what's best for ourselves versus collectivist cultures, which tend to focus on what's best for the group. So, how do we understand personality? Today we're going to be talking about Freud again. When I talk about Freud, psycho, and unconscious, all three of these always go together. Freud, psycho, and unconscious. So today we're talking about the psychodynamic theory, which really focuses on those unconscious conflicts. So when we're talking about our conscious level of our mental activity, this consists of the thoughts that we are aware of. So what we're currently thinking about. As I'm lecturing, you're probably taking down notes and thinking about that. Maybe you're daydreaming. Whatever you are thinking about right now is going to be that conscious level of awareness. Then we move into that unconscious level, that preconscious level. And this consists of the content that is not currently in our awareness that could be brought to our awareness. So these could be thoughts, these could be memories, things that are in the back of our mind that we can easily pull forward and access at any point in time. We might not be thinking about it right now, but we could easily access that information if we needed to. Then we have those unconscious levels, and this contains material that the mind cannot easily retrieve. And we talk about the unconscious. These are those thoughts that we are not going to be aware of, but they do dictate our actions and our behaviors. In connection with that, our conscious is going to be connected to our ego. Our preconscious is connected to our superego, and our unconscious is connected to our id. When we have conflicts between the id, the ego, and the superego, typically we are going to have developed defense mechanisms and have difficulties with our personality. So what are the id, the ego, and the superego? So the best way to talk about the id is that part of our mind that operates based on the pleasure principle. Freud called the force that drives the pleasure principle the libido. So today, in today's terms, when we talk about libido, specifically it has a sexual connotation to it. So that's kind of your sex drive that we most commonly talk about when we talk about libido nowadays. But really, when we're talking about the id, that is just that pleasure principle. The id wants us to do whatever makes us feel good. If that means go out and drink, use drugs, have sex, steal, go and do it. The id just wants you to be happy and engage in pleasurable activities. The superego, on the other hand, is that part of our brain, of our consciousness, that has very strict, rigid rules, morality, and that's our high level of our consciousness. So they want us to do what is always right. You would never do something that is wrong because the superego wants us to focus on just proper behaviors at the highest level of morality. But then we have the ego. And the ego tries to satisfy the wishes of the id while also being responsive to the superego. So this is kind of that moderator. It's the reality principle. So it involves rational thought and problem solving. So it allows us to engage in some pleasurable acts while still staying within the realm of reason and having moral judgment with it. So another best way to think about it is think about it being like a little devil on your shoulder. The id is the little devil. They want us to engage in pleasure and avoid pain at all costs. So the id is the little devil. The ego is us in the middle, trying to balance between the id and the superego. Think of the superego being like that little angel on your shoulder. The devil's telling you to do bad, the angel is telling you to do good, and you sit here in the middle with your ego trying to accommodate both of the two. But trying to accommodate the two can actually be very difficult. And when conflicts arise between the id and the superego, it leads to anxiety. One of the ways that we can try and help with this anxiety is through the use of defense mechanisms. And the definition that you should know for the defense mechanisms in psychodynamic theory, they are unconscious, so below where we can see mental strategies that the mind uses to protect itself from distress. So we are not aware that these defense mechanisms are happening. They are behind our subconscious and our consciousness. They are buried deep down below, and the whole purpose is for them to protect us. So we have different types of defense mechanisms. First of all, we're going to talk about denial. And this is just refusing to acknowledge the source of anxiety. We're in denial that the thing is even occurring. Next is repression, excluding the source of anxiety from awareness. So pushing it back into our mind so that we are not able to remember that it even occurred. Projection is going to be attributing unacceptable qualities of the self onto somebody else. So we take those feelings that we are feeling inside and putting them onto somebody else. So let's say, I'm trying to think. I didn't get along with my dad because I thought he was a very angry man. I would say, but actually he's not an angry person, I'm an angry person. That would be an example of projection. Reaction formation is going to be warding off uncomfortable thought by overemphasizing the opposite. Rationalization is creating a seemingly logical reason or excuse for behavior that might otherwise be shameful. So just rationalizing, coming up with a reason for why you are engaging in that behavior. Displacement is shifting the attention of emotion from one object to another, easier target. And last but not least is channeling socially unacceptable impulses into constructive, even admirable behavior. So let's say you're upset. Instead of going around and swearing about it, you could sit down and write or paint a picture. So taking that negative energy and using it to create something instead. So now we have an activity. So I'm going, give me a second here. So it can be found on the slides, but I'm going to break you out into discussion groups. And I'm not sure if we can always see the stuff after I break you out into discussion groups. So if you can't, you can go to modules, defense mechanisms, and it's listed there as well. I hope you'll be able to see that after I put you into discussion groups. What you can do for this is you do need to submit it in a text box format. So you can do repression, or just put A, repression, B, denial, C, reaction formation, and then submit it as a text box. So let's go back here. And I'm just giving you points for doing it, especially because we are at 63 students today. I'm guessing a lot of people took an early Thanksgiving vacation. So at the end of class, make sure you submit it and I will give you points for that. So I'm going to take everybody and pop you into breakout rooms so that you can discuss it and come up with your answers. I'll give you about 10 to 15 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back and go over the answers together. Everybody, make sure your mic is on mute now that we're back. Sometimes people forget to put it on mute after we do the breakout rooms. So we are going to go through the answers here. I have an echo that's kind of weird. Everybody at home, make sure, actually, there we go. I can always tell when somebody's mic is on because I get this weird little mute back. Okay, well, let's go through these answers together. So Lisa feels sexually attracted to her roommate's boyfriend, but does not admit this to herself. Instead, she constantly makes very derogatory comments about the boyfriend and feels disgusted by the way he acts. Which one of the defense mechanisms is that? You can put it in the chat or unmute yourself and say the answer if you'd like. So which defense mechanism goes with letter A? I'll go back here for anybody that needs to look. Will says reaction formation. That is absolutely correct. So in that example, she's attracted to her roommate's boyfriend. So she wards off these uncomfortable thoughts by overemphasizing the opposite of it. She says how disgusting it is to try and get her feelings to not be that way. Letter B. Priscilla deals with angry feelings towards her family by writing science fiction stories about battles between civilizations. Does any group know what answer this would be? So taking those mad feelings and putting that energy into something creative. No, not projection. Sublimation. So if we look at the definition of sublimation, it's channeling socially unacceptable impulses into constructive and admirable behavior. So taking those angry feelings and putting them into something creative. Letter C. Seth is angry at his professor for giving him a bad grade. He leaves class and shouts angrily at a passerby who accidentally bumps him. And I just want to point out that Seth probably earned whatever grade he got. The professor didn't give it to him. I'm guessing he earned his grade, but that is besides the point. So, what would be the correct answer there? Displacement. That is correct. So, if we look at displacement, shifting the attention of an emotion from one target, so instead of lashing out as his professor, he lashes out at a passerby, which is probably smart because if he gets angry with the professor, that probably isn't going to do him any favors in the future. Letter D. Mario feels angry towards his father, but is not aware of it. Instead, he complains that he cannot be around his father because he is such an angry person. Projection. Yep. Attributing unacceptable qualities of the self onto somebody else. E. Kate's use of alcohol starts to affect her academic performance, her job, and her relationships. However, she insists that she only drinks to relieve stress and that she does not have an alcohol problem. So really this could go two different ways, but I am looking for a specific answer. Most of the people so far are saying denial, and that is what we are looking for. Denial, not just a river in Egypt. No, it is not. It is refusing to acknowledge a source of anxiety. In some of my other classes, some people put rationalization because she's rationalizing her drinking by saying she drinks to release stress, but really in this situation, she is in denial about her behaviors. F. When 6-year-old Jamie gets less attention from his parents because of a new baby brother, he suddenly starts to wet the bed again. And yes, the correct answer is regression. We did not talk about it in this one, but it is a form of defense mechanisms that we talk about in other classes. G. Sylvia runs a red light while driving. She justifies this by telling herself she was already in the intersection when the light changed to red. She is rationalizing her behavior, correct. So she was already in the intersection. She might as well just go through. She's justifying her bad behavior. Last but not least, Nate witnessed his mother being beaten by a mugger when he was 7 years old. As an adult, he does not remember the incident. What is Nate engaging in here? Repression. Correct. So when we look at repression, excluding source of anxiety from awareness. So he's putting it back into his unconsciousness and choosing not to remember the incident. Sometimes the only way that we can retrieve those memories then is through like hypnotism, EMDR, or other psychological techniques. Good job, everybody. You can either submit a document to me that show me what answers you picked, or you can just send me a sentence in the chat or send me a sentence in the text box saying that you completed it and which group you were in. That's fine too, instead of making you type up all that extra stuff if you haven't already done so. So when we're talking about Freud, psycho and unconscious go together. Freud also focused on defense mechanisms, the id, the ego, and the superego. And then Freud also had his psychosexual stages. This is where Freud ended up losing quite a bit of people. A lot of Freud's ideas were pretty controversial, and although he gave us a lot of great jumping off points, and a lot of our psychology we have today does stem from a lot of his ideas, they were a little quirky. And here, his psychosexual stages tend to be some of the quirkiest. So when we talk about the psychosexual stages, the libido is channeled on one of the body's erogenous zones, which includes the mouth, the anus, and the genitals. So when we're talking about the oral stage, this is going to be the first stage, and it lasts from birth to 18 months. And what he is saying here is that these children get their libido and their sexual pleasure from anything oral. So think about pacifier, nursing, a bottle, chewing on everything babies can find. They chew on everything. They put everything in their mouth. And he's saying that part of the reason they do that is because they get their sexual pleasure that way. If people aren't able to get past the oral stage, if they get stuck in that psychosexual stage, they are going to be have oral fixations as an adult. So anytime they aren't able to get through a stage, they end up being fixated at that stage. So these might be people that need to be constantly chewing gum, having a mint in their mouth. Maybe they smoke cigarettes. They just constantly need that oral fixation in order to get their sexual pleasure. Next, we move into the anal stage. And this is going to be when children are 2 to 3 years old and they get their enjoyment from the excretion process. So going to the bathroom is where they get their libido is channeled at. If somebody gets fixated at this stage, they might end up being an anal retentive person. um, have you heard about like anal retentive personalities? Those are going to be those people that are tightly wound, a little high strung. And that is because, according to Freud, they were never able to get through that anal stage. They got fixated there. From ages 3 to 5, children are in the phallic stage, and then they go into what we call the latency stage. In the genital stage, adolescents and adults attain mature attitudes about sexuality and adulthood. I want to go back up to the phallic stage. I don't know why this is out of order, but around this age, we go into what's called the Oedipus complex. And this is going to be that attraction to the opposite sex parent. So um, it's going to be, let's say that the son wants to marry his mother, or the daughter wants to marry the father. That is going to be an example of the Oedipus complex, and just that sexual attraction to the other parent, and then being resentful of the opposite parent. So if you're a female, you'd be resentful of your mother and the sexual attraction she is gaining from your father. So as you can see, Freud's ideas ended up getting a little um, interesting. I want to say wackadoodle, but that's really not a proper term to be using. for psychodynamic theory, but yeah, he gets a little crazy there. According to Freud, we need to progress through these different stages, and if we don't, there are a lot of adverse effects. So I already talked about that fixation. If we don't make it through all the stages, we get fixated at that stage, um, and it makes it difficult to continue moving on. At the oral stage, we have those oral personalities. At the anal retentive stage, you get that anal retentive personality as well. So, not everybody goes to the extremes that Freud goes to. We have contemporary Neo Freudians, and they focus more on social interactions. So, they took some of Freud's thoughts and expanded on them while leaving out other aspects of it. So, according to their objective relations theories, our mind and our sense of self develop in relation to others or objects in our environment, and how we relate these others shapes our own personalities. So they didn't focus as much on defense mechanisms. They didn't focus on the id, the ego, the superego, and they didn't focus on those psychosexual stages. What they said is how we relate to the people around us ends up shaping our personalities. And I would say that, that's kind of on point. How we interact with our parents as children really helps shape our personalities as adults. And because Freud's central premise, we can't actually use any scientific method to measure this, and therefore most people have abandoned psychodynamic theories. How would we measure the id, the ego, the superego? How would we measure the psychosexual stages of development? It's going to be really difficult, if not impossible, to do so. And as psychologists, we like to use the scientific method and come up with facts and theories that we can actually put science behind and prove. So that is part of the reason that we no longer really go along with Freud's methods. We are going to stop there today before we move into the humanistic approaches. So I am positive for COVID. So we will not be in class until Wednesday. So on Monday, we are going to meet over Zoom again. We are going to finish going through the PowerPoint and we are going to play Kahoot because we have a test on Wednesday. On Wednesday, we are going to meet in person. I will be back at the University of Mary on Wednesday. You need to bring your computers, and we're going to take our test on Wednesday. After that, we only have 4 class periods left before finals week. So that's really exciting. It's going by super fast. So we just do chapter 14 and 15 after that. So Monday, though, we are going to meet over Zoom again, finish up the chapter, play Kahoot. Wednesday, we are going to take our test. And then on Friday, we are going to start with chapter 14. I hope everybody has a wonderful, relaxing, and blessed Thanksgiving. See you guys later. Make sure you submit um, the defense mechanisms document to me. Like I said, you can just put a little sentence if you want to. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.